Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we are continuing our ongoing coverage of the Russia-Ukrainian war. As it sits today, we are continuing to hear reports that we are looking at the possible Russian withdrawal from the western bank of the Dnieper River. So what happens if the Russians ultimately withdraw from this piece of territory that they currently control? Well, the prospects of a further Russian operation west of the Dnieper River, and this includes operations toward Kiev as well from Belarus, would be very, very remote. The ability of the Russians to then cross back onto the western bank of the Dnieper River, if they withdraw from this footprint that they currently control, this bridgehead on the western bank of the Dnieper River, would be highly unlikely. It would take a massive mobilization effort by Russian forces, probably the Russians would not have the ability to look at conducting operations east of the Dnieper River. West of the Dnieper River, until the end of summer of next year, or late summer of next year, if the Russians truly mobilize all its capabilities. If we see the Russian military-industrial complex ramp up, and we see the size of the Russian military expand to include, in all probability, direct assistance from China and continued assistance from Iran. Go figure. Who would have thought, going into this, that the Russians would be seeking assistance from the Iranians? It happened. Now, with that being said, these drone systems that the Iranians have provided will probably be reverse engineered by the Russians. It's very apparent that the Russians have neglected its own domestic drone program, especially its drones that can hit targets and or launch weapon systems. Right now, by and large, the drones that the Russians are using are of the kamikaze type, the self-destroying drones, the likes of that probably originated with the Israeli Harpy. Now, it looks like the Russians have decided to turn the lights out in Ukraine. Going into this winter, it could be a very, very long winter for the Ukrainians, given what the current Russian target set is inside of Ukraine. So it'll be very interesting to see whether this war fervor continues in Ukraine, or do they start to look for some sort of off-ramp? Is it possible? Difficult to say at this point. Compounding this, looks like things with China and Taiwan are starting to heat up as well. I'll cover that in another video. But that is definitely on the radar screen right now. So we'll have to see how that pans out, and then what happens. I'll talk about that more. But again, the big issue right now is the Russians turning off the lights in Ukraine, and the possible loss of the Russian foothold on the western bank of the Dnieper River. So difficult to say if the Russians have decided to call it quits in this area and head across to the eastern bank. It would be, in terms of conducting defensive operations, probably more advantageous for Russian forces. It would definitely allow the Russians to focus operations in the east. But at the same time, any hopes of marching into Odessa, I think at this point, are off the table, quite possibly permanently. But we'll continue to monitor, watch, and report on what we're seeing and bring you more content for your consumption. Thanks for joining us this evening, and we'll have more to come. Have a good evening.